Hello, and thank you for joining us. In this video, we are going to go over the CAM side for new features in VISI 2024.3. So first of all, let's talk about our support team. So we offer on-site and web training. Our help desk line is via 248-255-4348, and you can reach us by email tst.support.mi@hexagon.com. You can also join us on the Hexagon customer portal. This is a way that you can submit cases, track your cases, upload your licenses, and so on. We also offer tech days, such as what we're doing right now with our webinars, seminars, etc. And we have an unmatched level of support. As you know, you can reach out to us and you'll get an answer relatively quickly. So let's talk about the Hexagon customer portal real quick. So this is where you can access all your software licenses. This allows the company to be able to manage and access those licenses. You can submit technical support cases, track open cases via the technical support cases tab. And all the software, whenever there's a patch update, full releases, etc., will be available in the software tab. So speaking of licenses, it is very easy to install a license. All you need to do is have a computer connected to the internet and be able to log into the Hexagon customer portal, or even just upload them right from the license manager itself. So basically you go to the VISI launcher, or if you can get into VISI, go to the question mark drop down and select License Manager. Note, inside the Hexagon customer portal there is a friendly name. This friendly name is fully customizable by you. So that means you can upload this, and instead of having an external Excel report, you can have everything all in the customer portal for the naming sequences that you would prefer. So here's just a quick video just showing that. So if we go to question mark License Manager, you just go to Install License, Request License. Basically all you need is a server code to match up with your license here, and then it will download and automatically update your licenses successfully. So if you have maintenance renewal, if you have license extensions, you can update that right through here. So another little tool that we have under the question mark drop down is the remote support options. This is a way that you can reach out to us. So if we need to remote onto your computer, we'll walk you through these steps to get to the remote support, which would be TeamViewer. If you can't get to VISI, you can always get to the remote support button through the VISI launcher. So basically all you need to provide us is the ID and password that TeamViewer will automatically populate. Now we'll talk about our technical support services. We offer in-person or web services. These services can be used for installation and training of the new software. We could transfer your tool libraries, transfer your tool settings, and transfer any custom settings that you have. So feel free to reach out to us as mentioned with our contact information earlier. And for the agenda for this presentation, we're going to be reviewing the following: installation and prerequisites, translators, user interface improvements, drafting and modeling, surfacing, VISI CAM Interface, 2.5-axis cam, 3 and 5-axis cam, and wire EDM. Now we're going to talk about installation and computer prerequisites. So within the installation prerequisites, as with previous versions, you have to have Windows 10 or Windows 11 to be able to use the software. These have to be the Pro versions for each of these operating systems, and they're 64-bit. So note with previous versions, as well with previous versions that we've talked about before, files that are saved in 2023 can be brought back to VISI 2024.3. However, if you save a file out in 2024.3, it is not backwards compatible because of Parasol versions. Now we're going to talk about what's new with the translators. Just real quickly, for import translators, everything highlighted in green is what is new. Same thing for export translators. You can see everything that is new here. We're going to talk about some of the new formats. Wavefront.obj extensions for export. It is now possible to export a .obj file out. Autodesk Filmbox. The .fbx files are now supported inside of VISI. It's possible to import and export these files. The reader supports meshes from FBX 6.1 and 7.7. So the writer supports FBX 7.4. And you now can import the stepfile.stpa extension. So within the export instances as a part document, the writer will be able to write out translators for the product of by assemblies. When a body has multiple instances in assembly tree, checking this option will now allow exports to save the body out only once and maintain the linking between the instances. As an example, previous exporting a CATIA v5 file out as a cat product file for assemblies, each group would be represented in the assembly view tree, and now the bodies are inside that group. This feature allows flexibility during the export, providing an export file that is true to the representation that is in VISI, and it can save on file size, whereas multiple bodies are saved as one. Some additional improvements is now possible to handle assembly structures generated with layer nodes. This is helpful with CATIA v5 files, and it's now possible to import detail pages. So now we're going to talk about what's new with the user interface. So we have a new option for display selected number of objects. Basically, when you're using a command for block control, this shows you the amount of objects selected during the command. With block control, there's a new icon at the lower section of the screen that allows you to toggle block control on and off. And for dynamic highlight, you now have the ability to do a soft highlight. So if dynamic highlight is turned off, it'll just highlight the outline of whatever you're selecting. So here's just a quick video showcasing this. So if I use the attributes of visibilities, I can use block control. And for everything I'm selecting, you can see how this item selected area increases and decreases based on what is actually selected. So you can see the quantity of items. This includes elements, faces, edges, etc. And you can see everything that was selected in that possible area. We'll talk about the block control at the lower part of the screen. So whenever you have this active, this allows you to quickly toggle block control on and off, irregardless of if we're in a command or not. So if I have everything selected and I go to a command like change attributes, everything there will go right into change attributes. So I can toggle this option on and off. So now if I use delete, I can turn it on and off. I can select faces, I can select edges the same exact way. Okay, so as you can see, when I turn on block control, when I do my selections, automatically block control will be turned on within the command if I toggle it at the bottom part of the screen. This eliminates me from having to go to system settings and check the box for block control, as everything is right in the interface. Now we're going to talk about the soft highlight with the dynamic highlight options. You can see the option works as before when we're highlighting with the option turned on. So if I turn off dynamic highlight now, you still get a highlight, but it's going to do a soft highlight, so you can see the edges that are selected with the highlight. So when we're merging in data, it is now possible to merge in data and include your plot view files. So you just have to check this box upon your export of a file. Within Save Part As, there is a new option that now allows you to define the saving modes in various options. So you can do this by single file, by layer, you can output a file format, and you have file naming options when you're doing by part. You now have the ability to create an external file by using Save As and Save Part As. This allows you to export directly as a GRP GRS extension. And within the Save Part As area, you have constraints to assign the part as saved within Save Part As. So let's talk about Save Part As real quick here. So if I do my selections, you can see how we can select within our dialog here, choosing the directory. This is as before. So now if we do a Save Part As, you have the ability to turn on this options area. Within this options area, you have the ability to do single file. Everything on one layer is its own separate file. Everything by part is its own separate file. You can save associated plot view pages, etc. And you can choose which file formats you want by toggling these options. So you have an export directory for each one of these as well. And if I hit the checkbox, you can see how it will tell you how many files have been saved within Save Part As. You can see how if we do it by layers, each layer is going to be showing up as what it is. So again, Save Part As, if we do another selection here, you can do by parts. And when you do by parts, you can choose the entity name, you can customize the entity name, and this would show up in the part, plus whatever's in the assembly manager. So for this one, 11 parts have been saved. And you can see how it shows up with whatever the assembly manager data name is. So once again, save part as. You can choose whatever your target work plane is, whether you want it to be absolute or a relative work plane that you've created. You can even select a work plane through this option here as well. So feature attributes and color retention. When you're doing application rendering through the Systems Rendering tab to show face colors, it is now possible to show finishing attributes and cylindrical faces and toggle those options on and off. Within the Assembly Manager CAD view mode, there's a new option called Gray Others. This option allows you to gray out everything except for whatever's selected. This is useful for being able to select objects and be able to see specifically the objects that you are visibly selecting. You also have the ability to do virtual transparency shading modes. So there's a new option that overall changes the shading mode for everything. There's a new slider bar to be able to do this. Within Mixed Rendering Transparency, it is now possible to use the same slider bar. So if the value is 0, wireframe is represented. If it's more than that, obviously it becomes transparent. And we have Show Tangent Edges in Graphic Selection. You have a new option for being able to mark smooth edges within your dialog. So let's talk about our feature color retention. So we have the Enable Disable Face Colors option, but under System Settings, we have the Application Rendering. So irregardless of this, if this option is turned on, your cylindrical attributes for Feature Manager-based holes and your finishing attributes, which we'll talk about later, are enabled irregardless of the status of your face selection. So we'll talk about Gray Others now. If you select Gray Others, it grays everything out except for what you are actually selecting in the Assembly Manager list. You can see this makes it easier for being able to see specifically in a file where whatever you're selecting is. And we're going to talk about the slider bar transparency. This slider bar allows you by default to change the transparencies on the fly within this slider bar. You can see how it changes everything here. And for mixed rendering, you have that same type of slider bar. So when we do mixed rendering, whatever's selected right now, you can see that it is enabled. And then if we go to the slider bar options, or if we go into the mixed rendering, you can see here's your slider bar. If it's set to 0, everything is wireframe. If it's set to anything else, it is showing up as transparent. You can see how this also works when we just show only the transparency. So you can do different transparencies for what's mixed rendered and so on. So as you can see, face renderings do also work within the mixed rendering options. So transparencies work the same when you're selecting specifically faces within mixed rendering. Within Snapshot Manager, it is possible to enable the blank entities and dynamic sections. So when you're doing a dynamic section or using mixed rendering, the Snapshot Manager will apply this whenever you switch to that page. Any remarks that are added within this dialog as well can be exported out within your Excel and PowerPoint reports. There is an option for dynamic work plane by 3 points. This option is available in the preview, and now you can generate a work plane by 3 points. So as you can see, the work plane is dynamically updating. So let's talk about our mixed rendering options within Snapshot Manager. You can see how I enable only these 2 blocks. I'm also going to create a dynamic section off of this, which basically cuts everything in half. So within here, if I go into the Snapshot Manager, when I take a snapshot, it will retain the filters and as well as retain your dynamic section. I'll select another application point within here. and take another screenshot. And you can see how it's going to actually retain that. So let's say if I turn my mixed rendering off, if I turn my attributes and visibilities on and off, whatever page I switch to will display that specific rendering. So right now, if I close out of dynamic section, I close out of the attributes of visibility to show hide certain things, go back into snapshot manager, it will retain what those attributes of visibilities were in that current snapshot. You can see how it shows up with what layers there are, etc., etc. So you can see how the dynamic section, you can see how the attributes of visibility automatically display as what they are. So now we're going to go into the dynamic or visible work plane by 3 points. So you can see how whatever direction I move my mouse, you can see how it's locking that work plane by the 3 points. You can see the directions, you can see whenever I select a point what the actual work plane is going to look like before actually selecting it. So now we're going to talk about what's new in the layer manager. It is possible to add and remove groups by selecting items. You can see the icon here. When we select items, you can actually add layers and groups via the selection. You have a new option for filter by groups. So if you enable a certain group, only the layers that are enabled in that group will visibly show up on top. You can insert multiple empty layers in between by right-clicking a layer and saying insert more empty layers before. You can choose a quantity of layers, and this will put that amount of spacing within the layer structure. You can do hide by entities. This is a new option within layers and layer groups. This option allows you to hide items by selection within the layer manager. And you have a back and forward preview selection, or previous selection. So, you now can undo and redo what layers are enabled and disabled. This is a multiple instance, and you can go back and forward with these two new icons. You can apply a color to each layer or group. This color can be unique specifically to the layer and group. These are fully customizable and can be edited at any time. This adds a visual to be able to see what layers and what groups things are associated to. You can enable and disable the graphic color mode from this as well. So whatever color is in that layer group, that will display as a color for the solid or the faces, whatever is selected. Toggle this option on and off. So you can see, here's what the results look like. You can customize columns. So if you right-click on the layer manager, you have the ability to customize columns. So you can enable, disable what columns you specifically want on. So as an example, if you want to turn off the color mode, you can turn it off, and you can change the order of where everything is at. And a new option within the layer manager is called search and replace. Search and replace is a new function that allows you to search specific keywords and be able to see and find, and also replace these entities with these keywords. So let's go through some of these new features. You can see how if we select filter by groups, you can see all the layers that are actually selected. So if I turn this option on, you only see the layers that are associated to that group visible up in the layer manager. So as you can see, whatever layer groups are visible in that specific area, it only displays those items. If I right click, I can say insert empty or more empty layers, choosing the amount of layers I want. So you can see how it will put that spacing in there. If I enable my filter for unnamed layers, you can see that spacing in between all of the additional layers. If I go to assign colors, I'm going to assign colors specifically to a group. What this will do is whatever is a part of that group, you can see how it assigns those specific layers that color, just for easy visualization when it comes to searching for certain items. I can insert in a group or insert in a color via the individual layer as well, and I can reset the colors as well. So that resets the colors for everything, or reset the color for a single layer. So you can see how easily I can eliminate that option as well. If I go to customize columns, I could turn off that color column, and I can also display it at the same time and change the order of where it's actually at. I could do this for any one of those columns, making it easier to be able to customize and change certain things. So right now, if I go to search or replace, I can search for anything that has the name lower in it, and it'll highlight all layers that have that name lower in it. So with that search or replace, I'm going to go ahead and replace that lower option, and I'm going to replace it by adding in lower steel. And everything that has that name, it will apply that new change to it. Transform workplane mirror. There is a new option within the transform workplane to be able to mirror workplane. This allows you to mirror workplane via the XZ, YZ, and XY. When it comes to updating previews automatically, you have the ability to turn this option off and on. There is no longer the need to click the preview option. Frame alignment and dialog boxes. The fields that belong to different frames, collapsible or not, are aligned to each other. In this way, the field results are aligned. So you can see how there's a little bit more consistency when it comes to the dialog boxes. All of the fields will be aligned. And the escape key will stop a shade computation. So if you hold the escape key, it will prevent the shading from happening. This will allow you to speed things up if you accidentally bump the button. So let's talk about mirroring of workplanes real quick here. So as you can see, I've got my mirroring options here. If I go to enable this workplane, I want to mirror it to the other horn pin that you see, or the other slider that you see here. I can go to transform workplane. There is this new option for mirror here. So if I go ahead and select copy, I'm going to go ahead and select the mirror option, and I choose an application point for where I want that to mirror around. You can see how I have my XYZ areas, and I have additional dialog boxes here, so I can mirror this exactly on that other horn pin the exact way it displays on the one that we made the copy from. So you can see how here are some of the additional options for the mirroring. You can do some adjustments. So you want to rotate around YZ, XZ, XY. You can see how it's adjusting that workplane accordingly. Now we're going to get into some of the new enhancements with the pick and selection. With advanced filters and pre-selection, it is now possible to add a pre-select entity with other things specified. So you can see how you could do on same layer, same color, same description. So basically when you're doing selection, if something's on the same layer, it will select everything on that same layer. With enhanced pick, you have the dimensions when it comes to doing some dimensioning for max and minimum presets. So when you select between 2 points, you can figure out what the maximum point is and the minimum point is between 2 areas. Enhanced incremental translation preview point. When you're using the translation command, it will show you and highlight a preview point of what you're actually going to select. This highlight point will change depending on where your cursor is selecting. Enhanced pick center face boundaries. In enhanced pick, there is a center face boundary that is calculated when you do a boundary of a face. It is no longer the area of the face. In this way, the position is not necessarily centered depending on the eventual inner trimmings. When you're doing enhanced pick, the insert XYZ offsets, it's now possible to do mixed rendering inside of here. So when you're doing your insert XYZ offsets, you put an MM or an IN depending on the opposite unit of what you're currently in. And in chain selection mode for wireframe elements, it's now possible to use an angular deviation. So this angular deviation allows you in this way to pick your chain of edges faster and independently work them off of the angular deviation. New to translation, you have the creation of a matrix for copies in the translation command. So within translation, you now have the matrix parameters. There's also inside the translation some quick key toggles. C for copy, M for move, and I for the incremental translation. This toggles between incremental translation and the point-to-point selection. So here's just a quick video kind of reviewing some of this stuff. So if we go to translation, you can see how we have copy, multiple copies. You also have matrix parameters. Inside of matrix parameters, you have the ability of putting in a specific distance, and you can choose which direction that distance is going to go, X, Y, Z, or both. You can choose how many instances you want for each item, and you can see how it's making a copy of each thing. You can choose the spacing of it or the total length as well. So if I put in a distance of 300 millimeters, you can see how that distance stretches across the entire area. Mouse configuration settings. You now can load predefined settings in other systems configurations. You have the ability to create a save configuration with existing ones. So you have the ability of using the control right mouse, drag, and pan, and setting those by default from other systems. Within file print, labeling options are now available and automatically input in the filing print. So the date, file name, and file path will now be available when you're doing your print. We'll talk about some of the 3D mouse configurations. So there is a new SDK that was introduced in 2024.3 to be able to integrate the 3D mouse. No longer will you have to establish a keyboard function for the buttons on your 3D mouse to be able to assign shortcuts. So there's more graphic functions as well that are allowed to be able to be used. So the fit, escape buttons on your 3D mouse will actually display as what they're supposed to be. And you have the ability of displaying the center rotation while you're doing rotation with your mouse cursor. So here's just a couple of images showing you some of the enhancements. So this is not through VISI, this is through the 3D Connection mouse drivers. You can see how if we are in 2024.3, you can see how it's showing up with the commands themselves. So here's just a quick video preview showing this. So if I search for my 3D Connection mouse here, this is the drivers themselves, and get into VISI, which is the active software here, we'll go into our buttons. You can see how if we scroll down, you will see that current version of VISI, and you'll see the active buttons that you can actually start to assign. So if I wanted, let's just say, a query command to be that button on the 3D Connection mouse, I can assign that button to that command. Under VISI again, if I go into, like, let's say, window, or anything here, you can see how we can start assigning other commands. So window, you could do your views, you could do whatever you want. And you can set these right through the drivers of the 3D Connection mouse. So no longer do you have to have a key linked to it, have the shortcut assigned to that specific key. These are independent from that. So you can set these shortcuts as whatever you want, and they are assigned the same way they would be assigned in VISI. So when you close out of the drivers, and you actually select these buttons on your 3D Connection mouse, they will establish what shortcuts are actually popping up. Like, let's say auto constrain was one of them, query was one of them, etc., etc. Now we're going to get into what's new with drafting and modeling. So start with drafting. Intersection between axis and surface. There's a new command in the points menu called intersection between axis and surface. This command allows you to create a point, an intersecting axis between a cylindrical face and a generic face. This is useful for doing a center axis on an inclined hole. So if there's a hole on a face that's not necessarily flat, you can still find the center of it. Trim elements at multiple selection. This command has been improved to allow multiple selection of elements to trim when you are in the command itself. It is now possible to trim off of a profile, face, body, plane, and so on. In some cases, single selection works as it does previously. So here's just a video showing both of these commands. So we have an intersection between hole and axis face. So when I go ahead and select one of these, as you can see at the standard commands, it is not selectable. But if I go to points and I use this new command here, intersection between axis and surface, if I select the face and I select this face, it will find the point and create a point in between those. This is great for non-planar faces. So as you can see, you can select these different types of faces. So if I select this line and this face, it still creates a point where those two are going to meet. So you got the draw axis line and so on here. So if I select this line and this face here too, it will still meet where those two intersections will actually be. From here, we got trim elements with multiple selection. So if I select trim elements, I can select multiple different elements, and I can trim these multiple elements to be able to create intersections. This is great for, like, for example, this example with the circle, where I have multiple elements to be able to select from. The side I select is the side I'm going to eliminate. And you can see how everything else that's selected, you can see how you can do reverse side, you can keep both sides as well. So the command will work as it did previously, but this multiple selection makes it easier to do trimming with your wireframe. So I select this profile, I say keep both sides or reverse side. It's going to show and display what you want to see. The command also works off of planes as well. So if I go ahead and select these pieces of wireframe, I can select this face and I can trim at that face as well. So this will work off of planes, this will work off of any kind of sheet body faces. So you can see keep both sides, keep selected side, reverse side. Basically it's like a split elements and it's trimming it at the same time. So in this example here, we're going to use that trim elements, but we're also going to trim along points. So you can see how we have different points here. When you select points, you can choose a direction at those points where you want to trim from. Again, with the multiple selection, we can say keep both sides, selected side, reverse side. From that, you can also adjust the distance of where that trim is actually going to come from via that point. It's going to get the direction from the point itself as well. From here, we have dynamic curves. In the wireframe drop-down, other curves, there's a brand new command, or a couple brand new commands, create dynamic curve and projected curve. These commands allow you to create a respective curve on a 3D shape and be able to adjust this curve dynamically per point that you're selecting. This provides better management of closed curves with tangencies. And with the blend between curves, or blend with curve command, you now can use this command with two selections. So no longer is it required to be able to pick your start and end constraints. You just pick between the two curves, and there is a slider bar that allows you to adjust that start and end point. You still have the functionality that you did previously with this command too. So here's the create dynamic curve options. So if I go into here, I'm going to go ahead and select these points. So when I'm selecting these points, I have the ability to, after confirming, adjust any of the slider bars to adjust how that curve is going to be represented. So I can drag and drop that curve. I can add additional points with this command as well, and adjust and edit these points with the sliders as well. So this allows me to have a lot more functionality within the commands. I can do close curves, repoint curves, I can force a tangency or do a normal tangency as well, and when I confirm it, it creates that clean curve right there. So this is creating a projected curve. So if I go to wireframe other curves, we have create projected curve as well. So basically on this face, if I select these points, or select the faces and then I select the points, I could basically have that curve project and be forced to be projected on that face that was specified. So you can see it, you have that slider bar just like with the previous command. You can do your view direction, view orientations. You can imprint and apply these colors as well if it's going all the way through the part, but this automatically projects that curve onto those faces specified. So now we're going to get into the two-click selection with the blend with curve command. So I picked two curves, and no longer is it requiring the start and end constraints. You now have a slider bar to be able to adjust those start and end constraints. So it makes it faster to use the blend with curve command, especially if you're just picking between two lines and expecting for that blend to be able to tangentially create between the two lines. So you can see how fast this process is now. So we now have the ability to do a diameter input in the circular commands. This includes sketch, circle, cylinder, so on and so forth. So there's a toggle between these to be able to flip between radius and diameter. And with the wrap command, this has been improved to be able to do a wrap around a cylindrical shape as well as like a cone type of shape. So this allows you to achieve more results and cleaner results with the wrap command. Create profile drag window. There has been some improvements with the open and closed profiles. It is now possible to do multiple selection, and it is now possible to do a mixed selection between elements and faces to be able to create your profile. The classic method for propagating along the chain is still available when it comes to doing single element selection. The improvement options allow the dialog to work in multiple different cases. And with rectangle profile, the profile creation is now on the same icon as cuboid. So you have the ability to do an X center, Y center within this command. So the same options that were available in cuboid for being able to do this are now available in rectangle. So here's the create profile on multiple selection. So if I go to the create profile command, I could do a drag window, or I could do a selection. So if I select all of these, it instantly creates these as open profiles, just by doing a simple drag window. These are all profiles now to be able to reference for machining, for whatever you need profiles for. And for the second area, these are closed. I could just do a drag window, and it creates 2 closed profiles on this shape. So you can see how it's going to create those 2 closed profiles. When we do this as well, you can still individually select these entities to be able to create these profiles, but now with the drag window, it makes it faster to be able to do your drag selection. Now we're going to go into what's new in modeling. So as mentioned before, finishing attributes. This is a new command within the modeling feature properties. This command is used to attach face attributes to any kind of faces associated, so for example, a finishing face and so on. This command is also used in the analysis mode, showing the color of the faces according to the finished value with color application. There is the possibility of applying a color during the analysis commands. Within Boolean operations, non-manifold edges, you have repair non-manifold edges with the blend command, which is now available. This command is off by default, and it will display a warning message when this situation comes up. In previous versions, the blend will be created without any default options. So let's go over the finishing attributes real quick in a video. So under modeling, we've got feature properties and finishing attributes. So when we're selecting faces, you have the ability to apply attributes to these types of faces. So you can add in any kind of upper or lower tolerances. You could do a surface finish value, plus or minus. You can set your face colors to this, and all this stuff is transferred over to CAM, transfer it over to your different settings to be able to display what the face type values are. So it's basically similar to what was previously in the software for assigning properties to a whole, but this is assigning properties to faces. So as you can see, you can assign certain colors to each one of these, and this will display in what was previously mentioned when we display face colors, where you can enable the finishing attributes as well as cylindrical attributes as well. So if we select an additional face, you can assign certain attributes to this. These attributes, again, are mentioned in the analysis dropdowns, query, etc. So as you can see, we are selecting query here. You can see the finishing attributes display within the dynamic query. Under Surface Analyzer, the same thing happens as well. So you can see how we show our finishing attributes at the very bottom of the Surface Analysis command. The same thing with just a standard query picking the face. So we're going to talk about managing a non-manifold edge. So as you can see, these edges, or these pieces of wireframe, are either overlapping or not touching at all. So if I went to Unite, I went into the properties, I go ahead and select this area, it will give me the message at the very bottom part of the screen to activate repair tolerance. When we activate that, you can see how it displays any kind of trouble zones or any kind of problem areas, and you can activate, and it prompts that message when it comes to adjusting certain values. So you have the option of repairing the non-manifold with a blend, and it will repair it with a blend as well. Continuing with Boolean operations, propagate by color. In multiple commands such as unite, subtract, cylinder, etc., you now have the ability to propagate a color of an entity on a subtracted body, or with a united body. This function also works with any kind of Boolean operations, create, subtract, unite, and other commands as well. With radial pattern, there is the ability to create multiple radial copies. The distance can be by length and can be by total length. So copies can be equally distributed by the length. You now can create an angular copy, which is useful for creating single features, and it requests for a rational pattern of copies at the same time. So here's the propagate by colors option. So in this case, you can see how the wireframe, you can see how it's going all the way through the part for each one of these, let's say, electrodes here. And if I go to Operation Subtract, I select my data, I select all of these entities, you can see how it displays all those entities here. So some of these colors do display, some of them don't at this present time right now. So if I scroll down here, we can say preserve body color, which preserves all of the body colors when we're doing the subtract command. So this will retain colors inside the main block when it comes to the subtract command. This is also available in other commands such as, again, as mentioned, unite and cylinder. So right now if I do an undo, I can go to Operation Unite, and these body colors are different in each one of these areas. So right now you can see how that face color blue displays, but we can also preserve the body color in Unite. So this is nice for being able to preserve a body color so it doesn't just change it to the target body color. You can see how the wireframe lines stay the same, but it actually converts the body color into a face color for things that are being united. So now we'll talk about the radial pattern and what's new here. So within radial pattern, you can see how we have a multitude of different pattern type features. So if I go to the rotational pattern here, you can see how it shows up with that pattern where we can move, we can copy, we can do multiple copies. So if I say copy, it retains a copy. Multiple copies does multiple copies for however many copies that we want. You can do equally radial spacing as well. So equally radial spacing, you can see equally distributes the spacing between different items. Now we'll go to the one with an individual property here. We'll select the faces of it, we'll pick our point, and you can see how we have multiple copies already selected here from the previous selection. You can see how we have our different options in here. So if I did a full rotation, you can see how it does a full rotation. We do number of copies. It's going to equally distribute that full rotation off of one of those radial pockets. You can adjust the lengths very, very similarly and kind of get a similar result inside of this one instance command. We do equally spaced, and so on. So if I choose to, I could put in an angle. Adjust that angle, it's going to do the equally spacing. You can distribute the angle within the radial pattern command as well. So now we're going to get into what's new with extrude elements. When you're creating a solid using extrude elements, it is possible to project a profile on a non-planar face. Non-planar profiles can be extruded as a solid, which previously was not possible. We also have introduced a variable chamfer, very similar to the variable blend. It is now possible to add a variable chamfer, which works, like I said, similarly to the linear blend, where you can set application points for where you want that chamfer to progress from one size to a different size. Enable disable collision detection works with move a face and edit faces as well. So this function allows you to check the eventual collision of two bodies. So here's just a quick video showing some of these. So this is extruding a non-planar area. So when we're doing a non-planar area, you can still see how it extrudes this body as a solid. You can do certain distances, and you can still see, again, how this extrudes as a solid, even though it is a non-planar movement. You still have the ability to do extrude as a sheet body as well. And then here is our variable chamfer. We're going to pick this edge by a tangency, and you can see how you can display your first distance here and display a distance. So you can see how the chamfer type at the very top has now the variable chamfer. You can set certain application points for where you want that chamfer to change from a different size. So you can set this variable and change it to a different size and give yourself a different distance. So chamfer can progressively go from one size to a different size in a certain area. You can set constraining points as well. So now we are using the check collisions with edit faces and move a face. So if you go into here, you can select a face, and when you're going in to apply a distance, you have this check collision option, and it will highlight that collision while you're using edit faces. This option is available in move a face as well. Parallel 3D space direction. In Wireframe Parallel, you can now specify a direction for where the line goes. By default, the command works as it did in previous versions, but when you select a specific direction, for example Z, then the parallel will automatically go in the direction you specify. Project Elements Concatenate. There is a new option called Concatenate by Angular Tolerance in the Project Elements command. This option enables you to split the intersections at an extension. Adding this unique concatenated element allows you to specify angle deviations. Now we're going to talk about what's new within Bounding Box. In Bounding Box, it's now possible to set a Z orientation for the workplane creation. There are some options to rotate 90 degrees around X, Y, and Z, as well as reversing the Z around the X and Y icons. Very similar to Transform Workplane. It is now possible to rotate your axis around the workplane. And the angle information around the Z is available in Bounding Box when computing a minimum relative direction in Z. It is possible to rotate the calculated Bounding Box axis value to get integer values. Within Simplify Bodies, there has been some improvements with this, so it is possible to unmark split lines and relevant edges right from the Simplify Bodies command. The new option unmarks the split line and unmark relevant edges within the Simplify Bodies command. You can see the options here. So here's just a quick video showing some of the new things within Bounding Box. So basically I select the part, here's my Bounding Box. You can see under Create Workplane, you can see some of the new icons in here. We'll select this as our workplane. And then you can see the new options, rotate around X, Y, Z 90 degrees, and reverse Z around X and Y. So you can see hitting these options now applies that, very similar to how the Transform Workplane command would work. And now we're going to talk about the Bounding Box rotation. So you can see how we can select our different values. You can see how it squares it up flat to one of the sides. So if we do a minimum to relative direction, and I select a direction, there are new options to be able to rotate that Z axis. So as you can see, we start to apply a rotation, and that's going to change how this Bounding Box is going to be created. If I do a rotation angle, I could put in a specific angle, and you can see how it updates that relevant information here. So basically, when you are creating your Bounding Box, you are not having to square up a specific area, so you have some extra material left over. So if I go ahead and select everything, we can say align to the current workplane, or you can say rotate workplane axis, and you can actually type in your own custom angles. So I say align to current workplane. You can select the checkbox here, and you can input that angle in. So this works with relative direction and align to current. Now we're going to talk about what's new with solid group feature instances. Under Boolean operations on feature bases for faces, it is now possible to apply a feature of a face and have the instance correct automatically. The new option is called Automatic Match Regions, and it is available in the Unite command and the Subtract command. Solid Groups Manager editing multiple groups. You now have the ability to select multiple solid groups at one time and edit the GRP file. Each group will open up as a separate VISI session, and when you close out of all of the groups, you will see the associated solid groups update in the file. Within Mates, it is now possible to add a solid group with a linked extension for a file. It is now possible to apply Mates to external groups and other bodies. Solid Group Live Updates. When an external solid group is modified, a notification is sent to the VISI instance which a work file contains for the solid group we loaded. If the solid group manager is open, there will be a notification at the bottom of the screen. And it is possible to close the solid groups manager and a message will appear to say, hey, this is out of date. Solid Group Manager sorting options. It is now possible to do an ascending and descending mode within Solid Groups. Solid Groups external files will always show up at the top of the list. When you're editing position, it is now possible to edit a linear, circular, and matrix pattern of groups. Solid Groups mirrored instances. Mirrored instances are placed in a subgroup separate from the original group. You will see a star icon for that group, and for any instances that contain any kind of rigid transformation, such as roto translation, these mirrored instances will be exported separately, as technically the geometry is different in a different position. And the process will be aligned to the instances concept of VISI. So the same concept of other systems for export will reflect inside the Solid Groups Manager. Now we're going to go into what's new with surfaces and meshes. So we'll start off with auto constrain. The auto constrain command has been improved with the edge selection, allowing you to use the trim elements at intersection within edges. In this case, edges edge selection works just like how the wireframe selection did, with extracting and trimming elements to create a surface. Modes like Inside a Patch can work properly in this way, as they appear in the automatic solution list as a status for the trim option. Large Offset. There is a new option inside of Large Offset called Smooth Surface. This option allows you to adjust the number of points and the number of iterations within the large offset to achieve a better quality offset. So here's just a quick video. We're going to talk about the edge selection for trimming within auto constrain. So you see how we have this edge here at the bottom that extends past what our wireframe actually would reference. So we'll select the wireframe curve, and then we're going to pick all of our edges here. So if I were to go ahead and choose a solution here, you can see how it pops up with these options. If I select trim elements at intersection point, it actually will show up with more options and build the surface properly. So I'll talk about large offset. So you can see here's what our large offset looks like in comparison. So this is what it looks like when we don't have that smooth option turned on. You can see how we can have the original model comparison to what CATIA's results are, and now we're going to go over the large offset with the smooth option turned on. So you can see what the results look like before and after. So you can see the number, or you can see how we're going to apply an offset. You can see the number of X points, number of Y points. Obviously the higher amount, the cleaner your model is going to be, but we also have the ability of doing a smooth surface down here. So we'll check this box, and it's going to use the number of points, number of iterations from the smooth surface. So it's achieving a similar result to what we had in the CATIA software. You can also do a cut plane with a peripheral edge, and basically it's going to create a very similar offset. So it's going to create the offset and could create a solid block as well as a sheet body as well for this. So basically what this does is this is going to allow you to create a surface very similarly, and it's going to improve the large offset type of command. So as you can see, we just created a solid block out of that with the large offset. So we'll talk about fillet surface. There is a new column called typology, which in the fillet surface creates an immediate edge. Within Unite, retain relevant edges, it is now possible to retain relevant edges on laminar borders for a surface within the Boolean operation Unite. This makes it possible to keep relevant edges and outer edges during the Unite process, joining one surface or solid together. Within split plane, there has been some improvements with the wireframe elements. There's an option, reverse direction, to act on the direction of the created split line, basically out to in or in to out. There is another new option, reverse draft orientation, to reverse the direction of the eventual draft angle that's going to be created. So in this video, we're going to show the fillet surface here. So we'll select our edges. We're going to select the first side, we'll select the second side here. And as you can see, it creates a surface. Now there's no edges on the surface necessarily, and that's where this new option comes into play. Column typology. So basically what this does is it creates the edges. So you can see how minimum does not, column does. And now we're going to talk about uniting relevant edges. So you can see how we have these two separate surfaces here. One has edges marked as relevant, one does not. And if we select the properties box when we're using the unite command, you can actually make it so it no longer, with simplify turned on, even if they're separate surfaces, detaches those relevant edges. Now from here, we're going to talk about the split plane. We have a open profile here, and you can see how if we do by offset, by scale, you can see how if I did a positive offset as a certain value, you can see how we can do our surface extensions. Now from here, we can reverse the orientation by simply just selecting a box, and it flips that direction around. So you can choose one side or the other side. You can also apply a unique draft angle to each area, and you can see how it applies that draft angle. You can reverse the draft angle as you choose to as well, which will flip the direction from one side to the other side. We're going to talk about what's new with mesh. There's a brand new command called typological mesh. In the new version, PK mesh is generated in Parasolid, generally called typological. This mesh type is treated like a solid when they are closed, or sheet body when they're open. They represent a slightly different graphics, like the classic mesh, to distinguish them. Using this type of mesh object, it is now possible to achieve some results. There is the ability to be able to convert these solids to topological meshes, as well as convert classic STL files to topological meshes and vice versa. It is possible to list these inside the Assembly Manager tree, and you can calculate the weight of a closed topological mesh and represent the part in plot view using different shading modes with textures. So going off of what we were talking about before, you also can apply Feature Manager holes to the solid topological mesh. So you can also use Boolean operations inside of this, as think of this as a hybrid solid. So here's just a quick video showcasing a topological mesh. So basically, I'm going to load in a STL file or a JT open file. So you go in here, you load it in. You can see how it shows up as a topological mesh. So this is a fully functional closed mesh here that you can see. So you can see the new command inside the mesh dropdown for topological mesh, and this shows you the number of unconnected faces. So under mesh, we can use similar mesh cleanup commands as well to be able to clean this up. Connect it all together, kind of like a unite command would do. So then we'll go into topological mesh, we'll go ahead and select everything and basically join it together as one mesh. You've got some options here, so surface, close to solid, etc., which basically functions similarly to how a solid and surface would work with most VISI types of commands. Under System Settings Graphics, we can display the transparency for a topological mesh as well. None, or the minimum, will basically show no lines, and then maximum will show the lines as solid, kind of like how a mesh would look in the standard view. You can see how we can do dynamic sections with the topological mesh, and they display kind of as a solid here, as you can see if it is a closed area. You can see these inside of Assembly Manager. It does display the data as if it were a solid. You can assign properties to this mesh and add this information into your bill of material. So if we do a query, a weight, or bounding box, you'll be able to apply and see what the weight is for that topological mesh, as well as see that it is actually that type of mesh. So when we have it as a solid block, you can see how you can get a weight off of that solid block. When we select assign material, it assigns material and as well as assign weight to the Assembly Manager. As you can see, You can see the material and the weight applied. So now we're going to insert some features into this topological mesh. As a solid, you can see how it actually puts in a hole. These areas can be machined, and this topological mesh would represent as a solid for machining. So we can apply simple modeling commands such as edit faces within topological mesh as well. So you can see how we could drag and drop this area and change the length of the mesh itself. We can apply blends, chamfers to the mesh, and so on as well, so you can see how it applies that blend. So for our next example, we're going to select this surface here. So you can see how this is a sheet topological mesh here, and you can use similar functions to it. So if we select this as a face, you can see how it shows up with the face type as well. We can use change attributes and change the color of it as if it were a sheet body or a solid. You can see what type of element it actually selects as well. In our dynamic query, you'll see the same type of thing. Some of the new enhancements within Feature Manager include the Edit Multi-Symbol features. In cases where there's multiple holes to be edited without attributes, there was a limitation that did not allow the user to select a reference face or set the same direction. This limitation has been removed. This option will save time during the operation process as it goes from one step instead of two. Within topological mesh, as mentioned before, it is now possible to reference Feature Manager holes and standard element holes within the topological mesh as a reference plate. These features can be edited within Edit Multi-Symbol features. Repicking faces after the feature is no longer required to pick a reference face to create a whole feature in cases where it was required in the past. And you have the ability to add a feature. This new option allows the user to define a new feature within the Feature Manager dialog. Starting from an existing feature, the user can now copy the different feature or the defining feature parameters and change colors and description. This is useful for feature customization, which saves time in the future. And this can be used within your features config and can be used within Surface Analyzer and CAM Navigator. So this is another way, for example, with Compass, you can add more customization. So here's a quick video showing some of these new features. So within the repicking of faces, I have these holes that are within a certain cavity pocket. So you can see how this hole diameter shows up as what it is, and then I could basically repeat that hole across without being required to constantly pick that face. We're going to repeat this process a few times here, and you can see how without having to repick the face over and over, I could still create that hole, and it creates that hole off that top face. So now we're going to go into a new function for adding features. There's a new icon inside the Feature Manager that allows you to add custom features in here. For example, if I switch this to Drill Find, you can see the definition of the feature is named Drill 3. So I'm going to use this new icon here to define a new feature. So, for example, I'm going to change this name to Drill Custom. That's going to change the feature attribute name to that name. So inside of Surface Analyzer, inside of Compass, this is going to be the name that's going to reference. I just pick the next available number as far as the CAM type, and then you just rename the description, and you could change the CAM description as well, and color. So we'll change this color here as an example to this gold color, and we'll hit OK. So going further, this is now going to be copied after an application restart. So basically I just go to File, New, and I'm going to show this feature here. I'm going to draw a block, go into Feature Manager, and then you should be able to see that new call out inside the drilling dropdown. This is available for the other dropdowns as well. So here's Drill Custom. You can see how that attribute name shows up as Drill 31, and then we go into our selection tree and pick our attribute. So we're going to go ahead and give this diameter, give this a depth, and you can see how the whole color does instantly go to the color we specified. And inside of Surface Analyzer and inside of any other analysis types of commands, you will be able to see the attribute callout for that feature. If I go into feature properties, you can see that callout is also available under here, and it's been automatically added to this area. And under feature recognition, if I go ahead and start scanning for these features, you will see that that name shows up inside of Cam Navigator too. And now we're going to get into what's new in the VISI CAM interface. So, project quantity. This makes it easier to see what is in each tab. So how many projects are in each tab, as well as how many operations are in each tab. Highlight selection color. It is easier to identify individual entities using the CAM Navigator in the CAM environment. Main items will be now highlighted in the branch. It is easy to identify what defined tools are being used with this highlight, and the following differences affect piece, stock, obstacle, surface list, and curve boundaries. The difference between the color groups used and the geometry can be changed in this tab. The number 9 key will toggle from the old highlight mode to the new highlight mode. So as you can see, this highlights those specific colors. Feature display. You can now highlight entities in CAM when 2D features have been created. It is now possible to show hide features within the wireframe mode, and it will only display the features on top and the bottom of the profile. This makes it possible for easier visualization when using the selected operations or path lab. The 0 key will toggle this highlight mode. So here's just a quick video kind of showcasing the new interface changes. So you can see how if I go to add a piece, notice how everything is currently gray until I go ahead and do my selection. And when I select my specific piece, that piece would then highlight as what it is. So this is going to create a face list. So right now I'm going to select the main piece. There is a new option during the main piece creation called Create Surface List. This is going to create a face list automatically for all the available faces. If they're color-coded specifically inside of here, they will automatically be displayed as what they are. So right now, as you can see, everything is grayed out. We can go ahead and add an additional piece here. I'm going to turn off the solids list and go ahead and pick these surfaces as well. So for this, we can pick these references as, for example, these would be the areas we used, let's say, fill holes or using a capping surface. You can create these by a face list or choose not to if you wanted to, and that creates a secondary piece that can be associated to the first piece as well. If I enable my feature, or if I enable my attributes of visibility, you can see how we can show the fixture, show the stock. You can see the highlight color depending on what is actually selected, and then you can highlight specific faces, and it highlights the specific faces in the certain color. Again, the toggle switch for this is the number 9 key. Whatever selected will show up with the highlight color and indicate as these are the active things that are highlighted currently. You can see the same thing if I go into the capping surfaces, and it will highlight those too. You can also do a piece from a selected definition. So this is combining the two pieces. These can be referenced when you're doing the add operations later. So now it shows the combined pieces between the two areas. So you can expand that down. All the surface lists do show up. These show up as what piece they're associated to. For example, main piece. If I go to run recognition, this will scan for all these different types of features, and it will highlight the different features in here as well. So we're scanning for holes, we're scanning for pockets, and you can see all the setups that are associated to that specific piece. You can see all the different setups that were automatically created, and you can see how the face list shows up as initially wireframe. The 0 key will toggle that from the old way of seeing it to the new way. It just showcases the top and the bottom faces here. So they will display in wireframe, so it's easier to see your actual cutter path within those types of features. So again, 0 key toggles that on and off, 9 key toggles the faces on and off for what faces are active and what are not. Now we're going to see what's new in Model Manager. Within Surface List, Face List can be chosen by color, as shown in the previous video. This option allows you to automatically create face lists. This option will speed up the creation of face lists as well, so as you can see, here's a checkbox, as shown again in the previous video.
filtering to select elements from a solid group. It is now possible to select elements within a defined group or a whole group within the feature recognition. The group is also available within defined pieces, stocks, and obstacles. And Operation Association within CAM Navigator, the context menu, has been updated to add a helpful user interface within the Geometry tab. This also shows any related operations within the right-hand context menu per piece as well. As you can see, when we right-click on it, this is what it looks like, showing all the associative operations to that piece. Add operations. When adding operations for all of the interfaces, piece, feature, stock, you will see a lock icon next to the operation if it's not available within the certain selection you're doing. For example, the top one is a piece selection. You can see none of the 2-axis operations are available. And the second one is a pocket feature. You can see all the available operations. Within edit cutting conditions within an operation, you now have a new tab for post-processor. Per operation, this is where you're going to update your speeds and feeds. This is also where you can set the tool default parameters as well, and the defaults will actually be uploaded from the tool library. This will make it easier to make changes for cutting conditions right in the operation properties. You have the with this enhancement, it is no longer an option to do edit cutting conditions by right-clicking the operation. You still have access to this through the Edit Tools tab, however. So here's just a quick video kind of going over some of these new features. So you can see the improvement with the HTML. You can see there's a little help menu on the right side per tab and per area, showing you information about what is it looking for in that particular step. So you can see this for any of the tabs, showing you that help menu. It is easily right-clickable to be able to enable and disable that menu that pops up. This menu is available in pretty much almost any area within the operation area. So if I go to Add Operation, you will see if I select the piece, the same project window pops up. You can see how we can select different geometry. You can select however many pieces you want. This is a combined area right here, and you can activate different work planes as well. So if I go ahead and load the tool crib from this, you can see how it goes into our CAM setup, where we can do setup context, angle management, choose an obstacle, and the obstacle is referenced to the CAM setup rather than the project itself. So as you can see, it's showing that obstacle as our fixture here. You can go into angle management and choose your angles from this as well. And you can see again that help menu, which is right-click toggled on and off. From here, you can see in the Operations tab what operations you have available, such as roughing, rib, so on and so forth. This is based on what we selected. You can see the superseded, you can see some additional operations in here, and you can see that there is actually a lock icon on the tracing tab because it's not possible based on the selection that we did. 2.5 axis, it doesn't necessarily show the operations that disappeared. They now have lock icons showing you that they're available, they just can't be used within this specific selection. So if I go ahead and select roughing, you can see how I would add that operation via roughing. There's a new command that has been added, piece from selected definition. A new command has been added for this when I select multiple different pieces, where I can combine the two pieces as a single piece within an operation. So an operation can use multiple pieces to be able to cut from. This command allows for greater control over the whole piece to be used within Model Manager. The command gives the following advantages: better management of the piece overall, allows for the correct pieces to be defined and used within kinematics, no duplicates of data internally for what is in use in question for each operation, and the suggestion for workflows when multiple models are associated to a piece. This can be done with piece, stock, and obstacle. Under Operation General, Operation Interface has been reorganized for each operation parameter. There are now tabs that have been reintroduced into the operation tabs, making it more uniform to other operation parameters. This gives the ability to dynamically show and hide necessary parameters as needed. Being able to introduce the ability to display the advanced toolpath parameters, which can change as you go through the settings in the operation as well. automatic error replies. When a visualization is needed on a parameter and is incorrect, the setting will automatically highlight the tab as red, showing you what is wrong and how to correct the issue. Within the Help menu information under Advanced Tooltips, along with the operation added just as mentioned before, there's a Help menu specifically for each parameter inside the operation that pops up with information. This can be activated, deactivated as mentioned before with the simple right click of the little tab, and this allows new users to be able to learn what each parameter is doing. I personally use this, and it's personally very, very helpful to figure out what the command is and what it's specifically asking for. Select Geometry. This used to be called Edit Geometry within the right-hand context menu when selecting a certain operation. It's now called Select Geometry, which allows you to select an operation for 2D operations as well as 3D. The Select Geometry will also allow you to edit features for 2D under Operation Surface List and selected 3D operations as well. Select Piece Geometry is available within 3D operations, allowing the piece to be used within operations to be changed. So here's the new parameters in here. Add operation from. This is a really big enhancement request. Add operation from. This is a brand new command that is very powerful, allowing you to basically transfer settings from one operation to another. As an example, you could run a roughing operation and then add operation from, transferring the settings from a roughing operation into a raster, migrating parameters, and what's going to happen is when you migrate those parameters, the parameters will show up highlighted in the other operation. So as you can see here, when you use the add operation from, the parameters that are being changed are highlighted. It's going to pull the information it can from a previous operation. You now have the ability to remove obstacles from the operation. In an obstacle checking activation on and off, the operation parameter can be defined using a link to a single item on the CAM setup. This ensures that the correct obstacle is being used within the operation parameters and what obstacles are used in kinematic simulation. Read-only mode. There have been some operations that have been dismissed in this version. They will still display, but they'll display in a read-only mode. This allows the user to check parameters. It allows them to post the operation in the current setup. So an example of a dismissed operation could be a roughing standard, could be a finishing standard, etc. And basically with those operations, if you're looking to add or modify, as mentioned before, you would use the add operation from and choose a new operation, and that's going to migrate the settings it can from the old operation. Within dynamic incremental stock, this command has been revised, so that way it allows you to run select operations even with no stock defined in the project. When no stock is present in the project, there's a toolbox that will be used to set stock limits for the XYZ limits that have been chosen. When stock is defined in the operation or project, then the stock limit is used. So in our example here, we have some dismissed operations. I'm going to right click on those. You can see how you can show the operation parameters. They are in read-only mode, so they can't be modified, but they can be viewed, they can be posted from this version. You can see the toolpath as well. So on situations like this, if I need to make modifications, it is possible to do with the new add operation from. So you can see all the parameters in here. So if I right click and select the add operation from option, this allows me to choose a new operation to be able to create this from. So I'm going to go ahead and select add operation from. Go ahead and select a roughing operation because we're basically replacing the waveform roughing. You can see in yellow the information that was transferred over from the previous operation. You could change this stuff on the fly afterwards, and if there's anything that's required inside of this operation, it will highlight in red. For example, as you can see the minimum pocket size here. We could put in a different parameter, and you can see in all of the tabs what information was transferred over from the previous operation. So now that we have that, it allows us to transfer all this information over to the new operations to be able to build a similar toolpath. This allows us to go into the future with some of the new operations and allows you to migrate your data over to the new operations very easily. With the add operation from as well, we can also transfer that data over to even a different operation. So we're taking our roughing parameters and we're going to set those to planner. Basically what this allows us to do is it transfers all the settings that it can, and you can basically take the settings that you use from a roughing and switch it to a finishing type of routine. So it transfers settings over. So this is big for being able to do some repetition work. If you're using the same tool, using the same settings, and it will pull that same data in a finishing operation. So now we're going to go into what's new within 2.5 axis machining. Now we're going to get into what's new with pocket remachining and profiling. There have been some improvements with island side and bottom allowance management for island allowances. You now have the ability to define the island allowance and use that within features such as pocketing, profiling, and remachining. The island tops and side allowance parameters have been added and will be editable for the feature as well. A bottom allowance flag has been introduced on pocketing, profiling, and remachining. Toolpath has been maintained for a constant workflow 2D and 3D operations, but also is allowed to be able to manage any island allowance when island features are available. Pocketing, new lead strategies. There is a new lead strategy for adding a vertical feed segment on top of an approach ramp for pocketing operations. This helps to reduce the feed cutting length, improving the overall cutting time. Pocket optimization, linking, and rapid motion. A new flag has been added to pocketing operations to allow moves within a feature to be done on a rapid motion instead of the current feed movement. Nesting functionality. There has been a new option added to 2D pockets for nesting. This allows you to be able to group features under a parent feature. This new option will allow for more efficient ordering of toolpath and remove unnecessary movements around a component when multiple features are being machined. So here's just a quick video kind of showcasing some of these new features for 2-axis. You can see how we have our different pockets in here. You got pocket remachining improvements with the side allowance and management. So you can see here is an island right here, and you can see how we can differentiate the side allowance specifically with sidewalls and the island allowance. So you can start to see how we've got this little gap here on the top of that, or the bottom allowance for the island, and then you could have different ones for the sides specifically as well. So if I do move tool on point, you can see the allowance around that pocket too. So this is all being controlled. Here's a side allowance, then here is island allowance. So you could have a different allowance for the side and bottom walls in comparison with an interior island. In this case, we do have that. So between a 1/2 mil and a mil, you can see the difference between the two, as you can see by the toolpath specifically. So as you can see, that cutter is a 1 mil cutter, and then we have the 1/2 mil in between. So from this, you can see how we can make some adjustments to the tool. You can see there's what that allowance is, and if you were to compare that to the other side, it would be a little bit different. And in this example, we're going to talk about the nesting of features. So if I do a pocket here, you can see how we have different Z levels into this part, different pockets. And with this nesting feature area, this allows us to be able to create a smarter toolpath. So it's going to basically cut all the way to the bottom of the feature first, and then it's going to cut to the sidewall. So we'll look at these as a side-by-side comparison. We'll have one with nesting, one without, just to show you what the toolpaths look like. So under milling, we're going to start out with the one that does not have nesting in it, and we'll kind of compare both of them. So you can see how there's more levels on the one without nesting in comparison with the one with nesting. This actually creates a shorter tool path, and it's actually a smarter operation to run. Here's the one with nesting. We go from 24 levels to 17 levels. If I go ahead and add a group of operations as well with this, selecting another tool, you can add that as a single operation and use that nesting features as well. So it orders and groups everything together smartly, and you can also reference a previous operation within this and prevent it from cutting air. So if it already cut certain areas, this nesting feature will prevent it from cutting areas it already knew it cut in previous operations. So as you can see, it cuts what this cutter, which is a smaller cutter, can now cut. And then the same thing true with this if I don't activate nesting features. So it does create a little bit of a different cutter path between the two, and it just basically changes the amount of lines that it has to do. So the one without nesting has 78 levels, the one with has 76. So it creates a shorter toolpath, creates a smarter toolpath, and it's more efficient when it comes to your pocketing routines. And now we're going to go into what's new in 3 and 5-axis CAM. We'll start with 3-axis first. We're going to start with the surface list, which was formerly named face list. Surface list within operation and interface has been updated across all operations where surfaces can be used. These surface selection the surface selection dialog inside the operation is based off of the left menu options and has options as such: not used, to be machined, to be protected, and to be ignored. The right-hand menu within the offset area of the user interface will allow offsets to be defined. And then you have Z-limit method simplification, where previous strategies had a Z-limit, none at give and trim Z, at Z untrimmed. This has been removed, and these are computed in the background and not necessary as far as an internal management. So the expected results are to be within the upper and lower Z ranges of the part. This ensures that Z-limit definition is consistent across all toolpaths and default strategies. So here's just a quick video kind of showing the surface list. So you can see here's your surface list, here's all the different selection areas, the variables, you see highlighted which one is actually being selected right now, and you can actually go into these areas and you can simply double click on them. Double click will toggle through those different options. So you can also right click and see a list of the different surface areas as well. So in this example, if I go into here and I highlight the surface list and I go ahead and double click goes through the toggle steps of these areas. So the double click goes through the toggle steps: not used, to be machined, and so on. And then you can also set offsets for these surface list areas as well. So you can see how right next to it there is an offset. That offset could be applied within the operation. So on the face, we're going to offset it by this certain distance when it comes to any kind of machining operation. So if we're to be machined, this is kind of like setting an allowance to it. So if we set different offsets for each item, you can see how it color codes the faces based on the different settings you have. So the to be protected, we have it offsetting even further. To be ignored is just going to flat out ignore those faces. And when I go ahead and rebuild this, you will see the highlighted faces or highlighted definitions for those face lists inside that operation specifically. Working area management by using boundaries. The expanded value has been removed from the toolpaths which use it. This has been incorporated internally now into the boundary methods to have consistency with all 3-axis strategies. This removes the confusion of having the expand values when boundaries are set to on, to, and past. Z slices strategies support arcs and helixes in the toolpath, with toolpaths that work by slices within the Z, such as roughing, waterline, standard, waveform roughing, standard, waterline. They are now supporting arcs in the toolpath computation. This is managed by toolpath optimization options on the passes in the interference tab. When active, the reduction tolerance is used to fit arcs along toolpath points, and G2 and G3 outputs are posted within the NC code. Waveform roughing. Roughing and waveform roughing have been combined into just roughing, which can be switched between the two methods. Along with a combination of the two commands, scale factor has been added. These improvements include allowing a roughing to use smaller tools to allow smaller step downs and step overs by using the scale factor. Roughing step over smaller values. When it is suitable for a scale factor to be defined, it is now possible to use a step over value smaller than 1 thou or 50 thou in millimeters when added. Note, the validation of the step over value is linked in the scale factor used. If the minimum step over value is not allowed to you have to increase the scale factor. And in roughing sub-Z steps, a new option to add retract values has been added to the roughing toolpath. This will create additional levels between each Z level main to remove excess stock and toolpath ordering of the additional passes is to be machined from the bottom to top. So in the video here, we're going to showcase some of these new enhancements. We're going to go into roughing first and go ahead and select our tool. So within here, this is where we can start making some of those adjustments, such as selecting previous operations. This is also where we can do our boundary methods onto in past. As you can see, this is where we select those boundaries and reference where that cutter path is actually going to go. If the cutter path is going to go to the end of the part, on the end of the part, etc., etc. Within this, we have our advanced Z strategies, our advanced Z limits. You can see how you can make some adjustments to these ranges, and it will update in relevance to those ranges. Under toolpath mode, this is where we can obviously update our side allowances, bottom allowances, and so on. And this is also where we could change our strategy type for the waveform roughing. We could change our Z steps, and this is where the combination of those operations are located at. So this is kind of a global setting for combining all of the old and previous roughing operations. You can see here's our post processor for the speeds and feeds specifically for that tool. This is where we can control our coolant method, which is defined in the toolpath lab. Waveform roughing chip prevention. To help manage the cutting through thin walls, the ability to reduce the amount of thin chips has been introduced within waveform roughing. Waterline helical toolpaths. The advanced waterline toolpath has now been combined with the default waterline toolpath. This allows for all entry methods with helical. The waterline step down is now managed through the plunging methods within the links tab. Waterline adaptive automatic step down. Added to the waterline options is the adaptive step down method. This option allows Z steps to be adjusted automatically, but only where needed. The main step down is defined and will be managed for vertical areas, but adjust the minimum step down and cusp height for non-vertical areas. This is going to be big when it comes to cutting sidewalls and being able to transition from a vertical to a horizontal wall. So we're going to start out with the chip prevention and cut through chips and the reduction feed percentage for the thin chips. So we can add some percentages, we can activate the thin chipped areas, and this saves on your tool and reduces chatter at the machine. You can adjust your post-processor, your feed rate settings, and be a little bit more aggressive if you want to with the thin chip prevention. So when we build the operation, if there's any thin chips in certain areas, this would prevent that from happening. So as you can see, when we get into thin walls, you can start to see where you're going to be able to change your chip prevention. So we can color code this based on the speeds of your feed rate. As you can see, we adjusted everything to 500, so you can see where that feed rate is going to be for each one of those cutter paths. So when we look at this cutter path here, you can start to see that feed rate when it applies the colors. So you can start to see where we get into some of those areas is adjusting that speed automatically. Now that that's complete, we're going to go over the waterline operation. And we're going to select our adaptive step down. So we'll go ahead and select our piece, whatever piece that we're going to choose. And we're going to go ahead and activate for our step down an adaptive step down. So this is going to change that step down based off of switching from a horizontal to a vertical area and do this automatically. You do a minimum step down and a cusp height, and this is going to adjust what it'll minimally do for a step down based on the area of machining. So as you can see, when we build this operation, you can see how it's going to equally distribute that step down until it gets to an area it has to adapt, and then you start to see either thinner or thicker walls depending on what it's trying to do. So as you can see, this is the adaptive step down. When we're adjusting to certain areas, it will adjust the step down accordingly. Waterline transition method. There's a new option within the waterline toolpath to machine the Z levels by area or by level. Within waterline and raster pass extensions, a new option has been added for pass extensions that have been added to the waterline and raster toolpaths. Extensions are tangent extensions to the main cutting pass. Waterline enable floating passes. There's a new option called Floating Toolpath within the Waterline Toolpath area to allow the toolpath passes to be trimmed under undercut areas or non-cutting parts of the model. Here's just a quick video of this, just kind of showcasing some of these new features. So we're going to start out with our waterline here, and we're going to go into a duplicate. So this is without the side passes. This one is going to be with the side passes. So we've got our step over methods, we got our Z levels, we got our adaptive. Under geometry, we could choose the geometry we want to reference, in this case with our surfaces list. Choose that to be machined, and then choose a few other things to be machined as well for faces. From there, you can see the faces that we've chosen to be machined, and then we'll go ahead and select our toolpath and change our method to zigzag and change our pass extensions here. So we're going to do 4 pass extensions. Basically what this is going to do is it's going to extend that cutter path out beyond the part. So you can see how we have those different cutter passes outside of the extension area, and you can see how it does that across the entire entity area. Raster. Allow cross machining. The advanced raster toolpath has been renamed just to raster. Cross machining has been added to the raster operation. This option with cross machining allows the same functionality as the old toolpath, along with the combine mode, where cross machining passes are ordered at the same time as standard passes when they are needed to help with tool life, as the tool does not need to go over a full part and return to the complete cross machining pass. Corner remachining, conventional and climb on shallow areas. There's a new option to manage the direction within shallow areas that has been added. This new option will allow users to control the direction of cut method, climb or conventional, to follow the model or follow the uncut piece of stock. This gives flexibility and control of the direction to suit the user requirements. Also within corner machining, steep and shallow areas. There's a new option to manage steep or shallow areas within a corner toolpath. This option is managed to do the slope management area, where you can choose to machine all the steep areas or all the shallow areas on different reference angles. So here's just a video showcasing the last couple of slides. We're going to talk about our raster operation first. We'll go ahead and load up the raster operation and choose our piece. So from here, we're going to go over a boundary method, and we're going to go over the combined regions and being able to do multiple different cut directions within the raster operation. So under toolpath, we have our step over, and then we have the cross machining methods area. So this is where you can do a standard, before, only, or combined. The first one we'll do is a standard. So when we are working with island type of features, this will allow you to do different cut directions based off of that feature. So as you can see, there's 2 different cut directions depending on the feature here. So that's going to be doing the standard operation here. You can see that in the toolpath lab. And you can see how when we get to that island feature, when we're doing a zigzag across a part, it cuts in the different directions. So it's doing this all in one pass, one order, and then it will go in and cut the other direction and cut anything that's on the other. Where combined, we'll actually do both as it's going through its pass. So let's do a duplicate and we'll show that here real quick. So we're going to select combined here. And then let's look at this in Toolpath Lab again. So if we go ahead and hit play, you can see how it started at the top of that island feature, but it's actually doing all of the areas first in all the directions. So it's combining both directions. Whereas instead of going back to the other pass, it's going through the order of the zigzag, going from one side to the other side, and it's doing it all at once instead of having to go back and cut it again. So now we're going to talk about steep and shallow areas. So this example goes over steep and shallow areas. We're going to do the corner remachining on this, and we're going to choose these two options to show how they work. So we're going to go and select our ball nose here. And you can see how you can control the different angles between this diameter and radius. And then we could also choose our step over and our reference angle here for steep and shallow. So if it's within that reference angle, it will cut. So let's build this operation here. And you can see how this does both. So we'll go and duplicate it, and we're going to show one where it just does the steep and one where it just does the shallow, and controlling this by an angle range. So if we go to steep here, we'll choose this steep angle. We'll leave this at 45 and go ahead and build that one, and you can see how it only does the steep walls. And if you do the shallow walls, it only does the side walls. So we're just going to show that again here. So if I rebuild, this one only does the shallow walls. So as you can see, this is all being controlled by an angle, so it allows more control over your remachining operations. I can also control the Z range for my steep and shallow areas, so I could tell it I'm only going to cut between this, and that operation will only cut anything within that Z range. So this is only going to cut that bottom feature now by controlling those Z ranges. And now we're going to choose zigzag. We're going to allow it to cut multiple different directions. You could tell it to follow the model, follow the machine when you're cutting in those different directions. So for this, it allows you to cut not just in climb or conventional, it does both. It does it where it sees fit based on the geometry, based on what you're trying to cut. So here's just an example of that in Toolpath Lab. So you can see how it starts out as a conventional cut, and then it kind of reverses the direction. It can go to a climb cut, and it's basically allowing you to change up the direction of cut. Now we're going to go into what's new within 5-axis. 5-axis module geometry selection. Surface selection within 5-axis interface has been aligned to the new architecture of the command that is similar to the 3-axis commands and uses the same concept as the surface selection across drive and gouge check uses areas. Highlight colors for surfaces used in 5-axis have been also aligned within the 3-axis, adding colors for any surfaces used as guide surfaces. Post-processor full path variables. A new variable in post-processor macro language for the print of the work file has been created within the NC file, and the extension would be FLDWKF. Now we're going to talk about wire EDM and what's new in this area of VISI. Within the CAMSEP interface, the CAMSEP user interface for wire is now aligned with the new general improvements that were done in CAM. Wire operation extended tooltip menus. These have also been aligned just like the CAM side to give you the little help information area on the right. And there's been a new core holder strategy for slug welding that has been added to the technology points area. So this allows you to basically add slug welding options within your different features. There are 3 new options to be able to do this. You've got slug weld on start, slug weld on end, and slug weld distance. We'll show that in a video here later. Rename wire ADM cam setup. If it is now possible for a user to change the wire cam setup description and use the description as a remark within the NC file output. This improvement is useful for customers that manage more than one piece. Wire operation dialog. The overall operation interface is now aligned with the CAM side. Header and footer are now their own specific tabs. Here's just an image showing each one of these, and then we'll play a quick video. So this video is going to go over the last couple of slides. You can see how we have a pocket feature that we're going to go ahead and add wire to. So we'll go into the wire interface here, select our wire EDM, and then we'll choose our machine. From here, creating our project, we're going to create the project as it is, and you can see here's the new VISI CAM EDM setup. You can see the help menu that can be toggled on with a right click, and you can see move from, wire is threaded, and go home as additional options within this dialog. Now we are in the Wire EDM tab. You can see how it changed just a little bit. The help menu is on the right side as well, and you can see the extended information here. So we'll change the approach point for this specific wire operation. We're going to move it to a different area on this rectangular shape with a couple of slugs in it, and then hit OK. And then from there, we'll go ahead and go into our edit technology points to be able to add the wire slug points. So I go into the select geometry area, right click, and edit technology points. These would be available when we add more M codes into the area. So we pick our application point where we want the M code as well as what cut it's going to be. So you've got your slug weld start, end, and distance. Start, end, and distance. So if we put in a distance here, we got our start, and then we put in a distance. We've got start here. And then for this one, instead of putting a distance in, we're going to add a secondary point and do this as an end weld area. For this one, we're going to go ahead and select again. We'll go into slug weld distance, and this time input in another distance here. Choosing the distance of how far we want to go, and then what cut we want that active on. And then for this last one, we'll do the same thing, slug weld, and then we'll do a slug end. And that's how we can add these areas into our posted code. You can see the different settings, the different dialogues that show up here, where we got distances and we got the start and end areas. There's a new option called Auto Approach Points. This new option, available in the CAM settings, will allow Wire EDM to do an automatic approach for holes that have been allowing the configuration for optimized position. This is good for threaded holes for automatic. This can be useful for holes with larger diameter values. Smaller holes often require a hole center. However, larger holes may start near the hole profile. This avoids useless cutting time. So you can see here's some parameters here, and we're going to show a quick video that's going to kind of talk about some things from the previous slide as well as this. So this is kind of the continuation of the previous slide here, where I'm going to add a custom cam setup name. So this custom cam setup name can be shown inside of the post area. And then when we go into our machine parameters, this is our output code information that you can see. So if I go ahead and run this post, you will see actually from the previous slide, you will see the slug weld M codes added into that post, specifically where they need to be. So as you can see, we ran the post here. This is just showing the post processor. And when we scroll down, you can see the M codes that were added in for the slug welds. The M173, M172s, those are your different M codes as the examples. And then from here, we can go ahead and see where that actual message file information is actually going to be set. So you can see there's where the MindCam setup information is posted to, and so on. Now, we're going to talk about the auto approach points. Inside the cam settings, this is where that's going to be controlled. You can see here the two features I have. I got roughing and pocket features. So you can see when we go into cam settings, we go into Wire EDM, go to auto approach point, and you can activate this hole. So the parameter, or the perimeter parameters here, you can adjust that radius to whatever you specify, and anything beyond that radius, it will allow a little bit more control over that hole, and anything smaller than that radius will just go right to the center. So if I go ahead and go into here, go to the wire operation, selecting my machine, if I start wiring this out, it will display those start points on the bigger holes, not necessarily in the center, but it will show up on the corners. So as you can see here, these do show up in the corners, whereas the smaller circles show up in the centers. Optional stop after all cut tags. There's been a new option to be able to add a optional stop after all tag cuts. have been performed before the first finishing pass has been added. This can be useful for a user to be able to check all the slugs that have been removed before the finishing pass. This option is found under the Wire Cam Settings user interface when a manual strategy is defined, roughing all before and after the finish. And thanks for watching.